should have known better. When something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But desperation has a way of making you ignore the warning signs. And I was desperate. God, was I desperate? 3 days ago, I graduated from Barrett College with a degree in art history and $87,000 in student loan debt. My parents didn't come to the ceremony. They hadn't spoken to me since I changed my major from business administration 2 years ago. "You're throwing your life away," my father had said. "Art won't pay the bills, Mia." Maybe he was right, but I couldn't spend my life staring at spreadsheets just to make him happy. I'd watched him do that for 40 years, coming home each night with less and less of himself until he was nothing but an empty suit who fell asleep in front of Fox News. My mother just cried when I told them. "We had such hopes for you," she'd said. Like choosing art over business was somehow a moral failing. So I walked across that stage alone, took my diploma, and started driving west the next morning. I had no real plan, just a vague notion of California dreams and art galleries in San Francisco. My ancient Honda Civic was packed with everything I owned, mostly clothes, art supplies, and a collection of indie folk records I'd been building since high school. I'd saved about $2,000 from my barista job during senior year. It seemed like enough when I started. Gas was cheaper in my head. By the third day on the road, reality had started to sink in. Each fill-up ate another chunk of my savings. Every meal, even the cheap roadside diner stuff, felt like throwing money into a black hole. I started skipping breakfast, then lunch. My stomach growled as I watched the gas gauge drop lower and lower. I checked my bank app at a rest stop somewhere in Texas. $47.82. Not even enough for another full tank. That's when the panic started to set in. Real, adult panic. The kind that makes your chest tight and your hands shake. What was I doing? Where was I even going? My father's voice echoed in my head. "Art won't pay the bills, Mia." I pulled back onto Route 66 with no idea what I was going to do when the tank hit empty. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I wasn't so terrified. My playlist had stopped working somewhere in Oklahoma. No signal for Spotify out here. That's when I saw it. The Big Texan Steak Ranch loomed against the darkening sky like something out of an old postcard. A massive neon cow on the roof blinked, "Open 24 hours," in red and yellow lights. It looked like every other tourist trap I'd passed, the kind of place that probably served mediocre steaks to tired travelers who didn't know any better. But it was the sign in the window that caught my eye. Night waitress wanted. $50 per hour. Immediate hire. I pulled into the parking lot before I could talk myself out of it. $50 an hour? That had to be a mistake. But I was down to fumes, both in my tank and my bank account. I couldn't afford to be picky. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few semi-trucks idling in the back, and a beat-up Chevy pickup near the entrance. The neon cast strange shadows across the asphalt, making ordinary things look twisted and wrong. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I hadn't showered since yesterday morning, but maybe they wouldn't care. Places desperate enough to hire on the spot usually weren't too picky about appearances. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The inside smelled like grease and coffee and something else. Something metallic that reminded me of pennies. A few customers sat scattered around the dining room, none of them looking up as I entered. "Help you?" The voice came from behind the counter. An old man stood there, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. His name tag read Bricker in faded letters. "I saw the sign," I said, trying to sound confident. "About the waitress position?" Something flickered across Bricker's face. Relief? Fear? It was gone too quickly to tell. "You want the job?" "Yes, Don't you need to see my resume, or—" He waved his hand dismissively. "Can you carry plates, make coffee, follow simple instructions?" I nodded. "Then you're hired. $50 an hour, cash at the end of each shift." He reached under the counter and pulled out a fresh apron. "You start tonight." My heart skipped. This was too easy. There had to be a catch. "What about paperwork, tax forms?" Bricker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We keep things simple here. Just stick to the rules, and you'll be fine." What rules? But he was already walking away, disappearing through a door marked office before I could ask anything else. I stood there holding the apron, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. But then, I thought about my nearly empty gas tank, my dwindling bank account, and my father's voice in my head. I put on the apron. The first 2 hours weren't so bad. I'd worked food service before. 4 years of slinging lattes had taught me how to deal with customers and juggle multiple orders. The diner's layout was simple enough. A long counter with chrome-edged stools, a row of booths along the windows, and a smaller section of tables near the back. The kitchen was oddly quiet. I never saw a cook, but orders appeared in the window like clockwork. I tried not to think too hard about that. My first customers were truckers, mostly. They came in with tired eyes and worn expressions, ordered coffee and eggs, and didn't try to make conversation. I was grateful for that. Something about this place made small talk feel dangerous. Around 10:30, a young couple came in. They looked like college kids, probably on some romantic road trip west. The girl wore a flowery sundress that seemed out of place in the harsh fluorescent lighting. The boy couldn't stop fidgeting with his silverware. "Just passing through?" I asked as I poured their coffee. The girl opened her mouth to respond, but her boyfriend gripped her hand suddenly. Hard. She winced. "Just the check, please," he said. His voice was wrong somehow. Too deep, too hollow. They left their food untouched and hurried out. As I cleared their table, I noticed the girl had written something on her napkin. Run. I should have listened. At 11:30, I met my first regular. She was an elderly woman in a floral print dress that might have been fashionable in the 1950s. Her white hair was perfectly set, like she'd just come from the beauty parlor, but her skin had an odd, waxy quality to it. "The usual, dear?" she said, settling into booth 4. I hadn't been given any information about regulars or their usual orders. I stood there awkwardly, pen hovering over my notepad. "I'm sorry, I'm new and—" "Oh, of course you are." She smiled, showing too many teeth. "They're always new. Don't worry, sugar. It'll all make sense soon enough. Just bring me what's cooking in the back." I headed to the kitchen window, my heart pounding. To my surprise, a plate was already waiting there. Some kind of meat I didn't recognize, dark and glistening under the heat lamp. The old woman's eyes lit up when I set it down. She didn't use her silverware, just picked up the meat with her fingers and ate it in small, delicate bites. Her fingernails, I noticed, were slightly curved and sharper than they should have been. It was almost 11:45 when everything changed. The door chime rang, and I turned to see a man walk in. Middle-aged, balding, wearing a beige windbreaker zipped up to his chin despite the Texas heat. He moved stiffly, like a puppet being operated by someone who didn't quite understand how joints worked. He slid into the farthest booth without looking at me. His hands were folded on the table, perfectly still, too still, like he wasn't breathing. I grabbed a menu and approached, my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. Each step felt heavier than the last, like walking through deep water. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. "What can I get you?" No response. No movement. Just that awful stillness. Then, slowly, mechanically, he reached under the table and slid something toward me. A folded piece of paper. The paper looked old, yellowed at the edges, and felt warm to the touch, like it had been sitting next to a heater. "What's this?" I asked, but I already knew I wouldn't get an answer. The man stood up. His movements were wrong, not just stiff now, but almost glitchy, like a video playing at the wrong frame rate. He turned and walked out without a word, the door chiming behind him. I stood there holding the paper, knowing I shouldn't open it. Everything about this situation screamed danger. But there's something about being handed rules, about being told what not to do, that makes human nature rebel. Like seeing a wet paint sign and having to touch it, just to be sure. I unfolded the paper. The rules were written in what looked like red ink, though the color seemed to shift slightly as I read. The rules. Rule 1. If a customer orders anything not on the menu, say it's out of stock. Do not repeat the item back. Rule 2. Leave one fork untouched when clearing tables. Even if it's dirty, do not move it. Rule 3. If you hear whistling from the kitchen, do not check. Stay where you are until it stops. Rule 4. Between 3:15 and 3:30 a.m., under no circumstances step outside the diner. Rule 5. If a man with a red tie orders coffee, give him 2 sugars without being asked. Don't let him leave without paying. Rule 6. Write your name at the bottom of this list before the end of your shift. This is important. Below the rules was a list of names, each written in different handwriting. Some were so faded they were barely legible. Others looked fresh, the ink still gleaming wetly in the fluorescent light. The last name on the list had been crossed out violently, the paper torn where someone had pressed too hard. I shoved the paper into my apron pocket, trying to ignore the way it seemed to pulse against my hip like a second heartbeat. "Just quit," a voice in my head whispered. "Walk out now. Start hitchhiking. Anything would be better than this." But I couldn't. My car was running on fumes, my bank account was nearly empty, and the nearest town was miles away. Besides, they were just rules, right? How bad could it be? I was about to find out. The first test came just after midnight. I was wiping down the counter when the door chimed again. The man who walked in was tall, unnaturally so, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. His suit hung on his gaunt frame like it was draped over a coat hanger, and his face... Something was wrong with his face. It took me a moment to realize what it was. He had no wrinkles. Not a single line or crease, just smooth, pale skin stretched over sharp bones. He folded himself onto a stool at the counter, his movements fluid, yet somehow wrong, like a spider trying to move like a human. His long fingers, too many joints, I realized with growing horror, drummed against the countertop. "I'll have the blood sausage," he said. His voice was deep and hollow, like someone speaking into an empty well. My heart stuttered. Rule 1 flashed through my mind. If a customer orders anything not on the menu, say it's out of stock. Do not repeat the item back. "Sorry," I managed, my mouth dry. "We're out of stock." The man's face twitched. That's the only way I can describe it. Like reality hiccuped for a split second. His features seemed to rearrange themselves before settling back into that too smooth mask. "Of course you are," he murmured. His teeth were small and pointed, like a child's baby teeth that never fell out. "Then I suppose I'll have the pancakes, with syrup." He paused, then added, "The red syrup." I wrote down the order with trembling hands, deliberately not thinking about what red syrup might mean. When I turned to put the order in the kitchen window, I caught my reflection in the chrome coffee maker. For a moment, I thought I saw something standing behind me. A tall, dark shape with too many angles. But when I spun around, the man was just sitting there, still drumming those long fingers. The pancakes appeared in the window faster than they should have. They looked normal enough. But the syrup was darker than it should have been, and it moved wrong, seeming to flow uphill across the plate. I set the plate in front of him, careful not to brush his fingers. He ate methodically, cutting each pancake into precisely equal squares. The syrup left stains on the plate that looked like ancient symbols. When he finished, he stood up, unfolding himself like a time-lapse video of a flower blooming in reverse, and placed a silver dollar on the counter. It looked old, the date worn smooth, and it felt warm to the touch. "Your predecessor didn't follow the rules," he said casually, adjusting his cuffs. "She tried to get creative, tried to warn people." His smile widened impossibly. "Would you like to know what happened to her?" I shook my head. Wise girl. He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mia? Your father was right about one thing. Art won't pay the bills. But it might keep you alive. The ones who survive longest here, they learn to see things differently." I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't told anyone here my name. After he left, I looked at the clock above the door. It had stopped at 12:37. The hands never moved again. But somehow, I still knew exactly what time it was. Time doesn't work right here. Nothing does. The night stretched on like taffy, minutes bleeding into hours that felt both too long and too short. More customers came and went. A woman who ordered eggs over easy and cried blood into her coffee. A group of teenagers whose reflections in the window didn't match their movements. A man who looked normal until he turned his head, revealing that the back of his skull was missing. I followed the rules. I left one fork untouched on every table, even when the old woman with too many teeth used hers to carve strange patterns into the formica. I didn't question why the coffee pot never seemed to empty, or why the cream sometimes screamed when I poured it. At 2:15 a.m., I heard it, a low, melodic whistle drifting out from the kitchen. The sound was beautiful in a way that made my teeth ache, like wind through dead trees, like children laughing at a funeral. It made me think of my mother's wind chimes, the ones that rang all night after she left, even though there was no wind. Rule 3. If you hear whistling from the kitchen, do not check. Stay where you are until it stops. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white. The whistling grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to form words just at the edge of understanding. Promises, secrets, answers to questions I was afraid to ask. "Just take a look," it seemed to say. "Don't you want to know who's really cooking the food? Don't you want to see?" My legs trembled with the effort of staying still. The tune was familiar now. It was "You Are My Sunshine," the lullaby my mother used to sing, but wrong somehow, played in a minor key that shouldn't have been possible. "Don't." The voice came from one of the booths. The old woman in the floral dress was back, but she looked different now. Her perfectly set hair had fallen away in patches, revealing skin that rippled and shifted like water. Her too many teeth were visible through her cheek, which had become transparent. "The last girl looked," she said. Her voice echoed strangely, as if she was speaking from the bottom of a very deep hole. She wanted to know. She thought she was ready to see. The woman's face rippled again, features rearranging themselves like pieces of a puzzle. Nobody's ready to see what's in that kitchen. Nobody. The whistling continued for what felt like hours, building to a crescendo that made the windows rattle and the coffee cups dance in their saucers. Just when I thought I couldn't stand it anymore, when my muscles screamed from the effort of staying still, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. At 3:10 a.m., the door opened. The first thing I noticed was the tie, bright red silk, perfectly knotted. It seemed to pulse gently, like a living thing. The man wearing it was unremarkable in every other way. Average height, average build, brown hair going gray at the temples. He looked like someone's dad, like he should be reading the Sunday paper and complaining about property taxes. But his eyes, God, his eyes, they were the wrong way around. The whites were black, the irises pale as milk. When he blinked, it was sideways. Rule 5 echoed in my head. If a man with a red tie orders coffee, give him 2 sugars without being asked. Don't let him leave without paying. He slid onto a stool at the counter, his movements too smooth, too practiced, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. "Coffee?" he said. His voice was pleasant, cheerful even, like we were old friends meeting for brunch. My hands shook as I poured his coffee. 2 sugars. I had to get this right. I dropped the packets next to his cup without a word. He stirred slowly, the spoon making no sound against the ceramic. "You're doing well, Mia," he said. "Better than most. The rules come naturally to you." I said nothing. Something told me that conversation with this man, this thing, would be dangerous. "Your father," he continued, "he always followed the rules, didn't he? Such a good little worker bee. Never colored outside the lines. Never questioned why the lines were there in the first place." He took a sip of coffee. "That's why he's so angry with you, you know. You dared to break his rules. How do you know about that?" His smile widened impossibly, showing teeth that were all canines. "Oh, Mia, we know everything about everyone who comes here. We have to. It's how we choose." "Choose what?" "Our employees, of course." He finished his coffee in 3 long sips, each one impossibly loud in the quiet diner. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single dollar bill. The coffee cost $2. My heart pounded. Don't let him leave without paying. He stood up, straightening his tie. The red silk writhed under his fingers. "Wait," I said, moving to block the door. "You're short." His smile grew wider still, splitting his face like a cracked egg. "Am I?" "1 more dollar," I insisted, though my voice shook. "Please." For a long moment, he just stared at me with those inside-out eyes. Then, moving with that same unnatural smoothness, he reached into his pocket and produced another dollar. "Good girl," he whispered, as he pressed it into my palm. The bill was warm and damp, like it had been printed moments ago. "You'll do nicely here." He brushed past me and walked out into the night. Through the windows, I watched him step off the curb and keep going down, like there were invisible stairs leading into the earth. In moments, he was gone. I looked at the dollars in my hand. The faces on them weren't Washington. They were mine. By 5:50 a.m., I was barely holding it together. My nerves were shot, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Only one rule remained. Write your name at the bottom of this list before the end of your shift. This is important." I pulled out the paper with shaking hands. The names above seemed to squirm and shift as I looked at them, rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt my eyes. Some of them were written in that red ink that wasn't ink at all. Others appeared to have been scratched into the paper with fingernails or teeth. The last name, the one that had been violently crossed out, was trying to say something. I could see the letters moving, forming words, but I forced myself to look away. Some questions are better left unanswered. I took out my pen. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was full of mercury instead of ink. For a moment, I considered just walking away. But something told me that wasn't an option anymore. I'd followed the rules this far. I had to see it through. I wrote my name, Mia Chen. The moment the pen left the page, every light in the diner flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. When they came back on, the diner was empty. No customers, no coffee cups, no signs that anyone had been there all night. Except, the walls were covered in art now. Hundreds of paintings, sketches, and drawings, all done in that same red ink that wasn't ink. They showed impossible things, creatures with too many limbs, landscapes that folded in on themselves, faces that were also doorways leading to places that couldn't exist, and every single one was signed with a name from the list. I understood then. This wasn't just a job. It was an apprenticeship. The sun was rising when I stepped outside, painting the desert in watercolor shades of pink and gold. Everything looked normal in the early light. The parking lot, the highway, the distant mountains. But I knew better now. I could see them if I looked carefully. The customers from last night, sitting in booths that existed just slightly to the left of reality. The man in the windbreaker, endlessly entering and leaving the diner in movements that stuttered like a broken film. The woman in the floral dress, her face continuously rearranging itself into new patterns. They were watching me, waiting. I got into my car and turned the key. The gas gauge showed full, though I knew that was impossible. On the passenger seat was a sketchbook I'd never seen before, bound in leather that felt too warm to the touch. A note was paper-clipped to the cover. "Art won't pay the bills, but it will feed us. Draw what you see. Don't forget to use the special ink. We'll know if you don't." P.S. Your father sends his regards. He's been dining with us for years, though he doesn't know it. Some people follow rules their whole lives without ever understanding why. Welcome to the family. I pulled onto Route 66 as the sun climbed higher. In my rearview mirror, I could see the Big Texan Steak Ranch flickering like a mirage, the neon cow on the roof pulsing in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The diner would be there tomorrow night, and the night after that. The rules would be waiting. The customers would be hungry, and I would serve them, because that's what we do here. We follow the rules, we pour the coffee, we draw what we see, and we never ever ask what's in the red syrup.